As we are very close to the 2024 election, the Republican Party really finds itself at a crossroads of sorts right now. Donald Trump's grip on the party is undeniable, but the future of Trumpism, the future of the Republican Party, really depends on the results of this November election. And this is why I'm calling it an inflection point with repercussions that could last, depending on whether you're talking about the party or the Supreme Court, for quite literally decades. This election is a referendum on Donald Trump and the path that the Republican Party has taken since 2015. And depending on what happens in November, the Republican Party could either double down on its pseudo-populist, nationalist Trumpian turn, or it might attempt to reclaim a more traditional brand of conservatism. And whether Trump wins or loses, and by how much, will shape the Republican Party's trajectory for at least the next decade. So let's explore three key scenarios, what I see as the most likely scenarios, and what each of those scenarios would mean for Trump, for MAGA, and the future of the Republican Party. Scenario one is Trump wins, MAGA dominates, and really shapes 2028. If Donald Trump manages to secure a victory in November, the immediate implications for the Republican Party are going to be clear. The party will continue to be dominated by MAGA. Trumpism will remain the ideological foundation of the Republican Party for some time to come, certainly at least two more election cycles. A Trump victory in November would solidify MAGA as more than just a political movement. It would become a semi-permanent face of the Republican Party. Trump's America First populism, defined by these hardline stances on immigration and trade and foreign policy, would remain the primary lens through which the Republican Party views the world, at least as far as they publicly admit. This would be a victory that serves as proof that Trump's brand of politics is highly resonant, it's alive and well, not just with his core supporters, but with enough people to put him back in power. In this scenario, MAGA Republicans would dominate the landscape heading into the 2028 election. Trump himself would serve as a kingmaker. He would shape the Republican Party's future, likely by anointing his successor in 2028. Could even be one of his kids, Ivanka, Don Jr., maybe a high-profile loyalist like J.D. Vance or Vivek Ramaswamy. And the question would no longer be whether the Republican Party is Trump's party. The question would become, for how long will it stay that way? In his second term, Trump would be free from the constraints of re-election. This will give him an open runway to give more tax breaks to the ultra-wealthy and implement the neo-fascist immigration policies that he seems to love. International alliances, especially with NATO and global organizations like the UN, would likely come under scrutiny, and the judiciary, which Trump has already deeply and profoundly shaped, could see even more conservative appointments, and he could solidify a MAGA Supreme Court for a generation. We've looked at that in detail before. So in this scenario, the Republican Party of 2028 would almost certainly be one in which the MAGA wing dominates, and a Trump victory would represent the defeat of never-Trump Republicans who may start looking for other alternatives. The so-called moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Chris Christie, John Bolton, they might abandon the Republican Party altogether, at least as far as public endorsements. And likewise, a Trump victory would also have the potential to cause civil war among Democrats and expose similar rifts within the party. In the aftermath of this Kamala failure that we're outlining, the liberal moderates would likely want to move the party even further to the right to accommodate the disillusioned anti-Trump wing of the Republican Party, while the progressive left would advocate for moving the party in a more populist left direction, probably with a heavy emphasis on labor. But at least Democrats would be able to have that fight. In contrast, any Republican candidate would have to just be servile to Trump in order to be viable in 26 and 28. The rhetoric of 2028 would look much like that of 2020 and 2024. Candidates focusing on culture wars, fighting the woke left, leaning into anti-immigration and protectionist trade policies. And traditional Republican values like limited government, fiscal conservatism would continue to take a backseat to Trump's wet dreams and fantasies. If Trump manages to win, he will continue to decline cognitively and physically. And interestingly, Trump might follow a similar trajectory as Joe Biden, with the most loyal Republicans desperately insisting he's fine, he's as sharp as ever, even though his likely decline would be obvious to everybody else. Nonetheless, the Republican Party would remain Trump's party, with MAGA firmly entrenched as the dominant force. We now move to scenario number 2, which is Trump loses, but loses narrowly. Should Trump lose the election by a narrow margin, the fallout will be profound and chaotic. Given Trump's refusal to accept the 2020 election results, it is very likely that he would again contest the outcome, claiming fraud or irregularities and that he actually is the winner. This could trigger months of legal battles and widespread uncertainty, and it could lead to very serious implications for both Trump and the Republican Party. His supporters, who are already primed to distrust the electoral system, would rally behind him, and it would create intense political polarization. And the potential for civil unrest and violence in this scenario is very real. Trump's rhetoric about stolen elections has emboldened extremist groups and stoked this culture of grievance. Another election contest could lead to protests, confrontations, and yes, a heightened risk for violence. These factions might be even more militant and weaponized, given that Trump would lose to Kamala Harris, who would be the first black woman to become president. We know that this will trigger them. This could leave the Republican Party in a state of paralysis, unsure how to respond to Trump's refusal to exit the stage. A close loss and the ensuing chaos would also expose the deep divisions within the Republican Party. Your establishment Republicans, Mitch McConnell, former Vice President Mike Pence, they might urge Trump to concede and protect the integrity of the party. Meanwhile, the MAGA base, the MAGA Republicans, would probably echo Trump's claims of a stolen election and encourage him to fight, fight, fight. This divide would grow deeper heading into the 2026 midterms and the 2028 primary season. While the MAGA wing of the party would remain powerful to some degree, there will be a growing appetite among traditional Republicans for a return to something a little more normal, and the Republican Party could very well find itself at war with itself, unable to present a unified front. Even without another Trump presidency, the MAGA movement probably doesn't disappear in the case of a narrow Trump loss. Names like Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy will probably come up as 2028 contenders, and there will be a question as to what direction the party goes in. Trump's followers would continue to believe that the system is rigged against them. It'll fuel a politics of grievance and resentment that could dominate the Republican Party for time to come. And whether or not Trump runs again in 2028, he says he won't, and I tend to believe him that he won't. The movement he started would probably remain influential. There would be new candidates trying to pick up the mantle, but this version of the Republican Party would likely be a diminished one. The Republican Party might struggle to appeal to moderate voters and suburban Republicans who could be turned off by the perpetual contesting of elections and saying we are the victims, and the party could end up trapped in a cycle of election denialism, unable to break free from Trump's grip, even after he is gone, either from the political scene or from God's green earth. We now go to scenario 3. Trump loses badly. If Trump were to lose by a significant margin in November, it could mark the end of MAGA as a political force. If we see Trump suffer a decisive defeat, not only would this damage his credibility, it could signal to the country and even to many Republicans, we're moving on. They are moving on. This scenario would have a profound consequence for Trump and the Republican Party. A large defeat would weaken Trump's standing within the party. He probably won't concede the results no matter how decisive they are, but his attempts at claiming he really won would be very, very much unconvincing if it's a blowout loss for Trump. His political clout would diminish. Maybe his most loyal supporters remain, but the broader party would say it's time to go back to traditional Republicans. I believe that if there is a decisive defeat, within hours, if we know about it before midnight by the next morning, If we know about it by the next morning, certainly by that afternoon, you are going to start seeing Republicans realizing that Trump has nothing left to offer them. There's no reason to stand behind the guy. Immediately say, it's over. It is time to go back to being a different Republican Party. You will see Republicans abandon Trump. Not the hardcore voters who go to Trump's rallies, but elected officials. They will bail on Trump within hours if Trump suffers a major loss. Whoever the Republican Party props up in 2028 will still almost certainly be someone who had loyalty to Trump. You know, you could see like a Josh Hawley or a Tom Cotton. So we shouldn't be too comforted by this idea that you will see Trump abandoned. But a decisive Trump defeat might represent the end of MAGA by name. It wouldn't make this right-wing populism that MAGA has espoused go away. And it probably wouldn't make the party more reasonable in reality, but it would change the optics of what they put forward. Trump's defeat in a major way would also take a psychological toll on Trump. His brand is built on winning, and a large loss would be a devastating blow to his ego. The humiliation quite literally could kill him within some period of time, but Trump will never retreat deliberately. He will probably try to stay relevant. It's a question of whether the Republican Party will allow him to. So to put it a different way, a massive Trump loss could cause disarray within the Republican Party, which would probably be helpful to Democrats. It's rarely bad to absolutely blow out your political opponents, at least in the short term. The question is, in the long term, will it usher in a version of republicanism that is more likely to win? Because the Republican Party would be forced to confront its future, and there would be a fight to fill the vacuum left by Trump. The Republican Party's future depends on November. The stakes couldn't be higher, and each of these three scenarios would lead to a significantly different outcome, not just for Trump, but for the party and therefore the country. If Trump wins, MAGA dominates, and the Republican Party remains Trump's party, even potentially after Trump's death. If Trump loses narrowly, the Republican Party will fracture, but MAGA will continue to wield influence. And if Trump loses by a major margin of victory, the party will be thrown into disarray. Trump will try to stay relevant, but we will likely see other voices emboldened and maybe a return to a Republican Party that's a little less crazy. For Republicans, November is not just about who will occupy the White House for the next 4 years. It is about whether the Republican Party will remain the party of Trump or chart a new course. And the future of the party, and indeed the future of what used to be called American conservatism, depend on the outcome of this election. I know how I will be voting. I hope you do as well. Vote.org to make sure you're registered, to find out where to vote and when. We will see what happens very soon.